And I want to share with you kind of how this process works. And you may have heard it, right, being called a process of elimination. Have you heard that? It's a very negative twist on such a positive and exciting field, but it's true. It is a process of elimination. And so what we do is we basically start with as many places as we can that fit, and we narrow it down and we narrow it down until there's only a handful of finalists left. And your job is to not get eliminated, right? My job is to eliminate you. And so this is the game that we play throughout this whole process. Now, I often call this the funnel of doom just because, just because of that, right? So you really have to fight, right, to get in the running. And one of the things that I want to impress upon you is that we may go 3/4 or more through this process before you even realize that you're on our radar. You know, you may not even know it until we show up or we ask Pam or Deb some very weird question. And then you go, oh, are we in the running for something? What's that? So that's how this process works. The other thing about this process is that it's important to get on our radar at the very beginning, right? So if we've been here, if we understand this place, if we have relationships with Deb from IAMC and from Pam and from John, if we have those relationships already, we're much more likely to toss you into the top of the funnel. We can say, well, let's not look at Pennsylvania, but let's maybe look at Reading. Maybe let's look at that area, and then we're going to go ahead and look at all these other regions. So a big goal, I think, of some of the regional groups is to get on that radar and to build those relationships because they do take time. And as much as you think this world of economic development is so big, there's really just a handful of players. And building those relationships over time is really extremely important. Okay? So that's the funnel of doom. Let's go through this one as well, because I want you to start thinking about this place like I do, right, from an outsider's perspective, especially since so many of you are here and you know the assets probably better than anybody. Let's put your outsider's hat on and see how this works. So there typically are one of 4 reasons that a company is looking to relocate or expand, right? What are those reasons? Name one. Location, yes, but what about the location? Customers. Infrastructure. Okay, so let's start with access to markets. So that would be one reason, right? So access to either customers or suppliers in a good way with some interstate access and so forth. Think in the back of your head, how does this region do on that? Pretty good, doesn't it? You don't get distribution centers out of chance. You don't get those many large, high-profile distribution centers just because they're feeling lucky that day. So that suggests, right, that you've got a pretty good argument there. Another reason would be what? Access to talent. That's great, and that's going to be a more important driver as we go forward. How do you think Reading does on that? And I mean Berks County, of course. How do you think that we do on that? Super? Pretty good? Probably always areas for improvement, but pretty good, okay? Another driver might be the cost one, and I'm so happy you didn't start with that because so many people think that's the only reason. I'm going to tell you why they think it's the only reason. But a lot of times people are consolidating or they're expanding and they're looking to optimize their total costs, right? Because at the end of the day, you know it's not just an emotional decision, that there's actually financials that have to come into this. And you probably see that when you're competing with other regions, right? So the cost structure is one. And the other one is what I call access to unusual infrastructure. And so an example of that would be when Boeing was doing its search and they needed 2,000 acres and a deep water port. I mean, there's just going to be some things that are just infrastructure driven. Now, the trick is that even if it's talent driven, even if it's market access driven, we are still going to go down and compare those finalist communities on a cost basis. So it's not like you get a free pass because you happen to have excellent distribution, logistics, those kinds of things. We still have to compare you to those other finalist communities. And the way we do it, right, is there's basically 5 operating costs that we look at, okay? And you guys are good this morning. What are those operating costs? Labor, number 1. Utilities, number 2. Taxes, excellent. Number 3. These 2 are hard. Occupancy costs, number 4. Distribution cost, number 5. So think about this. When we put out those RFIs and we give you the impossible deadlines, right, what we're trying to do is we're trying to compare apples to apples so that we can start to finalize kind of which communities we're going to look at and what the pros and cons are of each of those communities. So one lesson from that is you got to know what your own cost structure is relative to your competitive set. And I would argue that your competitive set differs. When you're competing for a distribution center, you're probably competing with other places in the Northeast, right, that have highway access that are outside of major metros. When you're competing for food manufacturing, you could be competing in a multiple state region in more rural areas, right? And when you're competing for advanced manufacturing, it could be something different yet. So understanding kind of what your relative position is, I think, is going to help you, right, as you think through this from an outsider's point of view. Now, one thing I want to mention, too, is that there is no utopia. So you may say, gosh, you know, I wish that this one thing were better and different. Most communities have that. I mean, of course, right? There is no perfect place or everybody would be there, right? So the important thing is to have a good objective sense of what your assets are, to identify those areas that are weaknesses that you want to work on, and to work the plan. That's all we're expecting. We're not expecting that everything's perfect, but we are expecting that you have a good, solid assessment of where you need to work and that you actually have a plan on it. So let's talk about what I'm going to call the 3 megatrends of economic development. And again, let's think about how these are going to affect this region, right? The first is the elimination of risk. And this is not necessarily a new concept, right? We've been trying to eliminate risk for a long time, but what's happening is how it's playing out. So we're trying to eliminate risk now, not just on the property side, but in the permitting, in the zoning, in the speed to market, especially in the labor force area, the financing area. We are trying to button down as many of these unknowns as we possibly can so that we can have greater certainty going forward. And so that's a key word, is not necessarily, you didn't hear me say cost in here, did you? I believe that competing on time and certainty is going to be a way to compete in the future, not just on cost. So think about this. Think about if you told me it's going to take me anywhere from 60 days to 360 days to get some kind of permitting done, or if you said it's going to take you 120 days. Boom, it's going to be done by then. You see that, start to see the value proposition here of having the certainty. If you told me if I had a couple of different sites and they're relatively equal otherwise, this one we're not sure because it's not zoned yet, or we don't know about the utilities and we don't know about this, and this one over here has all that buttoned up. You start to see the comparative advantage of having it ready, right? And in fact, here's some of the ways that it plays out. Certified sites programs, we have 29 or 30 of the states now have some kind of certified sites program. Has anybody heard of that? It's kind of an arcane term. The economic developers among you have heard of that. It's a way to try to articulate up front, right, what the advantages of any specific property are, so that we have it all buttoned up, right, so that we understand that the work has been done and that everything is in order. And I'll go through a little bit more about what that means, but that's what a lot of states are doing. We're interested in states' fiscal position, right? We're interested because that's a risk, right? Here in the Northeast, I bet you pick on New York and New Jersey a little bit, is that right? In the Midwest, we pick on Illinois, which is always so easy. And then on the West Coast, right, California. There's just companies that just leave because they don't want to deal with those kinds of things. And then the other thing is water. Do you guys have water here? Do you know how much of an asset that is and how much of importance that's growing in the future? That's an asset, that's a strategic asset. Right? That's going to allow you to go after and attract certain businesses that can't even consider other places. I have clients who want to go after food processing and they don't have the capacity to do it. They can only go after like dry foods basically because they don't have the capacity to go after that. So again, think about that as a strategic asset. Somebody asked me the other day, right, what are the most important location criteria that you see? Labor, right? So it's going to be number one. But water is one of those that's really increased on the list over the last couple of years. Really been an important one, but labor is going to be important too. Number 2, my second trend is increasing role of regions. So there's a couple reasons. Let's talk about this a little bit about why the role of regions is increasing. We did a project recently. It was actually a back office claims center for an insurance company. And about 80% of the jobs were a certain type of claims processor. That makes sense, right? So what we did is we looked at the labor data for all of the 380 some MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, and we identified those that had a 20% above the average of those particular occupations. And then we screened from there. So think about the implications of that. Number one, we don't have to just start at the state level anymore. we have the data now. It's actually easier, right, to just go right to the metropolitan statistical area and look at the data, right, number one. Number two, you should know what occupations you have 20% or above on, right? But number three, we really like metropolitan statistical areas because they better reflect the labor pools, which is what we're trying to get at for a project. We're basically trying to guess, is our client going to be able to hire enough people of the type that they need, not just today, but over the next 10, 20 years? That's what we're trying to get at, right? And a metropolitan statistical area gets us there much more quickly than just looking at a state and then blah, 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 the old-fashioned ways. So this concept of the data is there, it better reflects the labor pools. The third thing, which is just as important, is that, you know, when we're narrowing it down, if you think about that funnel of doom, we're coming up with certain states and certain regions. We don't know what the specific properties are that are going to be contenders. You know, we're starting with that search first, and so it's helpful for us to have a single point of contact, because we don't want to call 15 or 20 different realtors in a region because each of them has one or two properties that we might be interested in. We're going to have to work with them eventually, right? But as far as those initial screens and those initial discussions, it's really helpful for us to have that single point of contact, right? Does it make sense to you? Because you're not the only region we're looking at. There's probably another 10 regions. And it's just management-wise, how are we going to organize all this? And we also need somebody who knows enough about the region and can help direct us, right? Because they're gonna have some suggestions where in the region we might go. So here are some ways that it plays out. Number one, it's increasingly likely that our search will start at the Greater Reading Economic Partnership website, not the state website. How many colleges are in the city proper? 2, right, Mr. Mayor? 2. How many are in 3? 3. How many are in the county? Boom. So if you're one of those 72 municipalities, you probably don't have one of those in your municipality, correct? But if you start to talk about the region, you can say, we have 5, right? So this whole idea of pooled assets and aggregation and thinking a little bit beyond just your proper borders, right? Because people are going to go to school across the jurisdictional boundaries. And in fact, we don't really care much about jurisdictional boundaries, right? I mean, we don't. I mean, we're going to get down to it when it gets to taxes and those kinds of things, but for the most part, you're selling a region. And so think about that. How many you have in the county, right? How many airports do you have then? How many industrial parks do you have then? How many schools do you have then? You know, you can see where this goes, right? All of those, how many parks you have, all those kinds of great things. Okay, so this group right here, right, is at the bottom of the funnel. When we go and we narrow it down and we come on site to do those interviews, what we do is we get a stakeholder, right? We ask you guys to put together a stakeholder group, and there's a couple motives that we have. The one is we just want to see how everybody gets along, right? Because if we're going to bring a manufacturer in here, which is, we know it's high risk, right? If we're going to bring a manufacturer in here, we want to know that they're going to be treated well, right? Number two, we want to understand how you're going to treat him, right? So we're going to ask other manufacturers in the room or other employers in the room, and we're going to talk about BRE programs here, business retention expansion. It's the first thing that we do is find out how you treat existing employers, because that's your best indication of how you're going to treat somebody new, so that's another thing we're trying to find out. And what this slide says is that everyone has kind of a role, and it's typically the regions and the states that take the lead on business recruitment, right? Because you all can't afford to go to the IAMC conference and build those relationships, but it makes a lot of sense for Deb to go and represent the whole region, okay? It makes a lot of sense. And actually, it makes a lot of sense for us. If she were going to call me in Chicago or in Madison and say, hey, Janet, I want to come out, I want to talk to you about the region, I'd say, great, you have an hour, let's talk. If any individual city or municipality came out, I'd say, I'm really sorry, but I can't possibly, there's over 3,000 counties in this country. Imagine how many municipalities there are on top of that, right? I can't possibly meet with you all. So it makes a lot of sense in terms of marketing the region to have one person come out and do all that kind of stuff. So here's another fallacy I think about regionalism. It's that, oh, now we all have to be alike, right? We all have to dress the same and talk alike. And most of you do talk alike already, so we're good, we got that. But the thing is, with the regionalism, right, it's not about, it's not about homogeneity, it's about celebrating your differences, right? Because when we come out here, we're going to know what's a good fit for us. We're going to know where we want to live. We're going to know where we want to put the business. We're going to understand how that fits. And it's good to have variety, right? It's good to have diversity. It's good to have some choices as far as where you go. The third trend, so if you're following along, right, elimination of risk is number one, increasing role of regions is number two, and then the third one is increasing competitiveness. And I was really thinking about the last couple years trends and what we've seen in terms of the site selection process. And we know, right, during the recession, it was tough times. Your business retention expansion, that's BRE, your business retention expansion program is really, really important. Because number one, we think most of your growth is probably going to come from that. And I'm telling you this as a site selector, right? Number two, it's your best defense against somebody else's business recruitment program, right? If so, evil people from another state are trying to recruit your businesses, right? You got to have good defense, and the way to do that is to have great relationships with your own businesses that are here. And then, as I mentioned before, how you treat your current businesses is really the best indicator of how you're going to treat a future business, right? So that piece of it's really important for competing. Another thing, and this has changed in the last 20 years, this is very different. You have to know your value proposition, because it used to be good enough to say we're a good place to live, work, and play. That used to be good enough because the competition wasn't as strong, but now community branding is a word that rolls right off of people's tongue. Understanding what your points of difference are, and in fact, my site selector friends and I will tell you that you have to understand your brand, and I don't mean your logo and your colors and all that. What I mean is, what is it that you're good at, right? What is it that you stand for? What is it that you're good at? What kind of projects are the best fit for here? That is our responsibility now. First is people. People is always at the very beginning of the search, and it's always at the very end of the search. I think that those communities that are the most successful in addressing the workforce issues, right? You're not the only place who has workforce issues. I can't think of a place who doesn't have workforce issues, okay? So the thing is understanding the particular nuances of yours, right? The labor market challenges that you have. And what I see is that they're going to be company-led. I see that they're going to include soft skills and hard skills. And I see that, especially I'm interested in manufacturing a lot, the attitudes toward manufacturing, the attitudes that parents have toward their kids taking careers in manufacturing. Those are all kinds of things that we can address. The key, though, is to slice off something narrow that you can actually impact, and that careers in 2 years is a perfect example. So challenges, you have a lot of people that are maybe not even GED or high school, right? And you want to get them into higher paying careers, mid-skills. That's a perfect example of the type of program I'm talking about. So it's very specifically focused. I'll give you more examples, but wait and see if you have any questions on that. The second is the product pipeline. So by product, right? By product, we mean available sites and buildings. That's what we're marketing in economic development. I mean, I see that there's a need for more better, right? More better as far as the property pipeline goes. I am thrilled, however, that they are up on Sites and Buildings database because we do use those, so very good job there. Here's what I see as the 7 deadly sins, because I do a lot of these site visits where I come in and I do the immersion consulting kind of thing. Number one, it's not listed in Sites and Buildings database. Your team is right there, you're on it, that's good. No sales or lease price, okay? What are we thinking here? Let's say you go off to buy a used car. Are you going to look at a used car that doesn't have a price on it? Okay, would you do that if you were a company and you had other places and there's always other places and other choices. Got to have a list price. In fact, I would insist if I were the economic development group, I wouldn't market any unless there was a fixed cost or I had an option on it. And it's okay if we don't control it, that's fine, but we need to have that understanding that you understand what you're selling, right? Second one is no control over the property. Again, options are good. Developer is fine, but we've got to make sure that the economic development group can represent that property. Okay, Mr. Mayor, this would never happen here, but a couple weeks ago I'm out on a project. They know I'm coming. They know the site that I'm looking at. The mayor is there, the commissioner's there, we're sitting around a table, and we go, okay, now why is this zoned agricultural? And he goes, well, we could change that within a month. And I said, well, you've had the property for 13 years. I'm not making this up. Why isn't it zoned manufacturing? Or second case you say, I've got it all laid out here, Janet. When you do this, within a month it'll be that, because it goes through this and this and this. That's the next best thing, right? Is explaining to me how it works. 13 years. This mayor, I'm gonna harp on him a little bit, because the next thing was the utilities plan. I said, you got water and electric to the site? Yes, we do. Okay, well, what's your rate? What's your capacity? Every time I asked him a question, he would get up, go in the hall, call some poor person at City Hall, get the answer, come back. This took about 20 minutes. Every time I asked a question, he'd go out and come back. So you got to have this stuff ready. And what I mean by no utilities plan is, does anybody have an extra couple million to bring the utility out there right now? Right? It's speculative, not knowing who the development is going to be. Maybe not. You might not have that in your back pocket. But you know what you could do? You could lay out for me how long it's going to take, what it's going to look like, who's going to pay for it, how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, who's going to pay for it. Have your engineers, right? Have them draw that out. Where's the planner, right? She's over there. She's like, I'm going to get on that right now. I can't wait to get back. Okay, they're already on it. Okay, so right, why not pull that information together? Because you're going to need that information when the deal's on the table. Why not have kind of thought through that? We're working on a 500-acre industrial park, right? I'm helping a utility that wants to start one of these things. You know what we did that was the most unusual thing ever? At the initial meeting, we had the water sewer guy from the city there. I mean, we had to give blood from him and everything to make sure he kept it secret, because we didn't have any options on the property, right? So we had to keep it secret. But we had him in that first meeting because we saw that as a fatal flaw. And we said, we got to know if you're going to be able to service this region and annex it and the pipes and this. And that was extremely important. So don't forget about your utility partners, right? Unknown permitting process, that's probably the worst. There's just uncertainty. We don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know how long it's going to cost. We just don't understand how that's all going to work. That's the biggest, it might probably not even cost-wise, but just in terms of frustrations, that's probably one of the biggest ones for us. Because again, remember this competitive world we're in, we move on. I mean, if we start to get pushback, if you change the price on those things are not good. So what we're talking about is reverse site selection. Here's how I think about it, right? So you're in this place, and when you're marketing a place, it's a relatively fixed thing. You can't just move and say, I think I'm going to just, that's the one thing about economic development that's fixed, is the actual location, right, that you're at. So here's how I think about it. Think about that funnel, right? You want to be that place at the bottom of the funnel. So the question is this: which companies and industries place the greatest value on your particular mix of assets that they would choose Greater Reading, Pennsylvania, right? So what you do is you go through the site selection process backwards and in heels, if you wish, to figure that question out and to find out who has that greatest value, and that's how you market and position it. And then the last of the 6 Ps was programs, right? So the business retention expansion, the business startup, the business recruitment, having a balance of all those things, looking at the talent equation, all those kinds of things. And that's it. So thank you. Thank you.